I'm always correcting people, and I'm even going to correct the introduction of me. I'm a CTCP. That's a Cape Town chauvinist pig. So I was detained in Cape Town, not in Johannesburg. But more important than that, I was just one of many, many people who took part in designing the Constitution. It was a fantastic part of my life. I'm very proud of the role I played. In America, one's often introduced as the person who did this, and in fact, if there's a moral of our story, and perhaps even a moral of the story that we're considering today, it's not a person, it's not a particular vision, it's the capacity to get multiple voices participating. So I'm gracious enough to correct the very gracious introduction to myself and to start off with that point. And this gathering reminds me of a session we had in a room much less elegant than this. I think it was really a portion of our library in making in the new Constitutional Court, temporary accommodation in Johannesburg. And there was an American guy from Washington. I just remember his name was Ralph somebody, who is one of the leading personalities in a very big firm that specializes in places of commemoration. I think then he had 64 partners, so it's big, and he was on his way to Shanghai, which was becoming very, very big, stopping over in Johannesburg. And it might help people to date it. It's a time when guys were wearing shirts with these button-down, remember the button-down shirts? Anyway, I remember he had a button-down shirt, his name was Ralph, and I thought, what the hell is this guy coming to tell us how we should memorialize part of our history? And it was a good lesson to me, because in fact we gained an enormous amount. We were so proud. We had overcome apartheid as a system of organized, institutionalized racism with immense deprivation and impoverishment of millions of people. We had done it. We'd done it relatively peacefully. We had negotiated a transition that was momentous and enormous. We'd achieved a constitution which is held up to the world now as a model of a progressive, comprehensive, modern constitution founded on principles of human rights. And I thought, who's this guy coming from America to tell us how we should memorialize? And the place that was at issue was the old Fort Prison in Johannesburg. Prisons are prisons are prisons, that was one of the points that he made. We felt this prison was absolutely unique, but it did have some unique features. We say with a very dubious pride that we South Africans have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. No one else can make that claim. And it's a prison deeply rooted in South African history. It was set up by Paul Kruger, who was the president of a Boer republic at the end of the 19th century, at a time when gold was discovered in his area, and he had the quaint notion that the British would try and seize the gold fields. And of course they did, and the first time they failed, and he needed a prison to lock up the insurrectionists, and he established a fort in the 1890s to lock up the Brits who were going to try and seize what he regarded as his land. The fact that he had seized the land from African peoples didn't enter into his consciousness at the time. The Brits won the Anglo-Boer War, so they locked up the Boers, and people were actually executed as having allegedly been traitors to the British, were executed there. The Boers then won political power. They locked up the blacks. And we were the generation that said, enough of everybody locking up everybody. Let's have a constitution. It wasn't put as crudely as that, but can't we have a society now where we just all live together, respecting one another, nobody trying to dominate anybody else? That was the foundation of our new constitutional order. And the Constitutional Court had decided that this is where we wanted to have our permanent building. what could Ralph tell us? The 2 points that I remember, it was a full day seminar, are very sharp in my mind. The first was he said, please, everybody is rushing to me with their stories. People who were locked up in the state of emergency in 1960, everything segregated, the white women went on a hunger strike, and the hunger strike spread to somewhere else. Then people from the black consciousness movement locked up in the 1980s, or the 1970s after the Soweto uprising, and then somebody else who was locked up there, and somebody else, and somebody else. He said there are just too many stories. And you don't commemorate a prison as a prison. People know what prisons are. They're the same and they're pretty awful everywhere in the world. So for you it's very emotional and very significant and poignant, but for the visitors and future generations, they just see cells and bars, and that's not all that interesting, and there has to be something more. And the main point that he made was you need a dominant theme. I don't know if he used the word master narrative. My feminist friend in Chicago doesn't like the word master narrative. She speaks about the big Momma Narrative. In any event, a dominant, overarching theme that connects up all the different stories and gives a sense of coherence to the place. And he said he is in charge of the major buildings of the capital of the United States of America, in charge of promoting the significance of the buildings to the world. And you can go to Washington and you see all these different government buildings, and each one has its own story. But the connecting theme, it will be the Capitol, it will be the White House, he said there are 4, it will be the Supreme Court, and it will be the Lincoln Memorial. And they are encapsulated into the narrative of democracy. And that is the overarching theme that links all of them. Each contributes a very specific element to it, a distinctive element, but the whole is the interactive, mutually supporting function of those 4. And they actually arrange tours, and they promote the publicity, and they tell the story in the mode of the interaction between those 4. It doesn't mean there aren't other stories. The Vietnam War Memorial becomes an important story, but it's a subsidiary one to the dominant overarching one that lasts over a period of time. And it sounds so simple and so obvious, but we came up then with the idea of Constitution Hill. Many, many stories are being told there. And the stories are being told by the former people who were imprisoned. You had, in South Africa, everything was divided. White men's prison, prison for white men, prison for black men, the waiting trial block that had a bit of everybody but segregated cells, the women's prison. Each with its own particular history, character, kinds of people who were locked up there at different stages. But the overall theme is the Constitution Hill, the place that told the story of oppression, of division, of authoritarian rule. The prison that used to be called the Native Men's Jail, number 4 prison, became the symbol in the whole of Johannesburg of oppression. If an African man disappeared, the family would go to the casualty ward in the hospital, would go to the mortuary into number 4. That was the big dark hole of Johannesburg. To this day, people sing songs about number 4. When my wife was wanting to bring our then 2-year-old child from where we were living a few miles out to the center of town to pick up the car at the court, the Constitutional Court, she went into the street, and there you have these little combi taxis, and there's a signal. I don't even know what the signals are, but you indicate where you want to go with 2 fingers, 1 finger. She knew the signal, and the taxi stopped, and she said, "Can you take me to the Constitutional Court?" "What?" "Can you take me to the Old Fort Prison?" "What?" "Can you take me to number 4? "Ah, number 4, hop in." So it symbolized a state of oppression, of denial, of hardship, of hopelessness in a way. Number 4 prison. How could all these stories be contained in one master Big Mama sort of narrative? We decided to call it Constitution Hill. The tours take people from the different jails, ending up in the Constitutional Court. The women's jail is now not only a memorial site in itself, but the Commission for Gender Equality, which is a constitutionally mandated body, has its headquarters, and the new building literally flies over the walls of the women's jail. All sorts of meetings, exhibitions, and so on are held in the former men's prison, white men's prison. And number 4 is kept as almost sacred site of minimal intervention, very, very solemn, with voices, a few statements up on the walls indicating what it was. And finally you reach the light, and that is the Constitutional Court. And that becomes the theme of Constitution Hill. And the basic theme, the way I present it, is taking negativity and transforming it into positivity. You don't deny the energy. It's a terrible energy. It's the energy of our history, of a painful history. The energy is there. Energy doesn't, there's some law about the conservation of energy, it doesn't disappear. It comes out in different ways. So instead of trying to bury it and suppress it, and then it will leak out who knows where and when, you acknowledge the existence of that energy, but you convert it into positivity. And the tour becomes a remarkable experience. Anybody coming to the court knows why we have a constitutional court and the Bill of Rights, is reminded by the architecture, the memories of the place. Anybody going to visit the prison knows we don't stop there, that we moved on and we achieved constitutional democracy.